How can you not know? I cried in panicked horror. Are we talking like 3 or 3,000? She shrugged her shoulders. I honestly don't know. I just know there are more facilities, at least one more in this state alone. And that means more like you. I again shuddered. Without question, she replied. I was a prototype for many things, and many more came before me. I'm the product of many successes and a few failures. It's safe to assume that those in the other facilities are further improved versions of myself. I tore at my hair. For what purpose? I screamed in anguished frustration, my previous resolve further slipping away from me. They couldn't even control you once you escaped, I shouted. What can they possibly gain by creating further dangerous weapons? They're playing with forces no one can handle. Why? What the hell is their goal? In my rage, I drove straight past my house and had to slam on the brakes. I took several deep breaths and tried to calm myself down. As I went to shift the car into reverse, I realized that my hands were shaking to the point where I could barely grasp the shifter. It doesn't make any sense, I sighed, looking at the creature and forcing a smile as her concerned eyes searched my face. None of this has made any sense from the start, I continued, trying to breathe deeply. If they wanted weaponized and obedient super soldiers, why not take willing participants? Why control you with a device that kills you if you disobey? You don't feel any sense of loyalty towards whatever the hell that organization is, do you? The doctor's there, she seethed, her teeth clenching. After what they did every day, the needless tests, the mental and physical torment, I will split them apart. Whoa, that's what I'm talking about, I said, calmly putting out my hand and motioning for her to calm down. People don't just do that. Say what you will about the pursuit of science and the costs involved and stuff, but not only is human testing on that scale entirely illegal, no one should morally be able to bring themselves to do that to someone. Not only that, but the failsafe mechanism only makes sense if you were to be bought out or something and try to use your abilities against the organization, but why the hell would they purposely make you loathe them, make you want to turn against them? I glanced at the assault rifle under the seat and softly continued. And how the hell does a program like this even come to exist? It seems as if this is heavily funded and supported by a large entity, especially if there are more facilities. I'm not one for conspiracy theories and stuff, but it definitely appears government-sponsored. This seems like some bullshit tinfoil hat-wearing craziness. I just can't bring myself to believe that such a thing is actually happening. Such a horrid thing could never come to pass in this country. What the hell has happened to require a program that creates weaponized humans? I smiled half-heartedly, turning to the creature and looking at her apologetically. Sorry, this has just been bugging me. It's okay though, you don't need me stressing you out. I'll figure something out. John, she stammered slowly. There's just no way you could... Hey now, I cut her off, resuming my joking demeanor. I don't need a super weapon telling me a measly human will have some slight difficulties bringing down an entire organization. I laughed, but her face just showed concern. I meant there's no way we could do it, she softly said. I blushed, taken completely aback. Oh, I stammered. Well, then, we'll figure something out, okay? For now, we've just got to get you cleaned up and lay low. At least that's my plan for now. As I turned into my driveway and saw my father's car parked outside, I sighed heavily. Of course, today was the one day he would be home. He had been gone on some sort of business trip for the past week or so. I seem to remember him saying he would be gone for longer, but that clearly wasn't the case. I threw the car into park and turned it off. Already having thought through such a scenario, I grabbed my backpack from the back seat, having decided last minute that it was too heavy to bring with me and my friends on our trip. I felt queasy emptying the contents into the back seat. All four of us had arrived at that place less than 2 days ago, but so much had happened it felt like weeks since they were gone. I set the empty backpack aside, rummaging through the pile of stuff I thought I might have needed to get into the ghost town. I found my pocket knife, switched the blade out, and jabbed it into the back of my backpack. I carved out a fairly large hole near the top. Here, I said, placing the bag by the girl as she sat forwards in her chair. Put your chains in here, I continued, feeling clever but trying to hide my nervousness that it wouldn't be enough. It's like a little carrying pouch, and people are less likely to scream in terror when they see you, that as well. She rather hesitantly glanced at the ground, and the metal began shrieking as her chain started to snake into the backpack. No, whoa, no, I cried. Not like that. Just put him in with your hands. You'll burn a hole through the pack doing that. She let the chains drop from the air and they smacked onto my upholstery, singeing it black. I cringed as the leather sizzled and popped. Alright, I winced after I was confident that they had cooled down enough. Like this. I gingerly grabbed the speared tip of one of them and began feeding the chain into the bag. I continued to do the same with the other 3. Now, I said, sitting back, put the backpack on. She slung the straps over her shoulder and wiggled a little, adjusting it on her back with the sounds of clanking metal. She then looked around, her eyes occupied with gleaming wonder as she lifted up her arms and looked behind herself, tendrils of metal no longer splayed out all around her. Her cheeks swarmed with a light pink as she avoided my gaze and whispered out, "I look like you now." Downplaying the gravity of that statement, I laughed out. Well, let's just hope everyone agrees. I glanced in the rearview mirror at myself. I looked like complete shit, my skin pale and dead, my hair matted and frayed. Even my once dark green eyes seemed to have been bleached away, gray and lightless as they sunk into my troubled face. I grinned at myself, but the action seemed fake and hollow. Between me and the creature, we looked as if we had barely survived an explosion, our clothes caked with dust and dried brown blood that flaked away into the air. Camping, I thought. Forgot to bring a change of clothes. My father never paid attention to me or my friends anyway. He likely didn't even care where I had been. My phone was long out of batteries, but I knew I wouldn't even have any messages from him asking where I was. He was more than likely locked away in his study anyway. He wouldn't even ask or notice our appearances. We could just go inside and get a change of clothes, get cleaned up. I opened the door for the creature and helped her out of the car. She stared in awe at my house for a bit, taking it all in. "You live here?" she asked. "Yeah," I sheepishly answered. The house wasn't exactly a mansion, but it was darn close, certainly larger and far grander than any of the surrounding houses. It was white with a brown shingled roof, archways indicating the entrance by the paved circular courtyard where I parked my car. A seemingly endless field stretched out behind the structure, and the back porch had a stunning view of the surrounding mountains. "Wow," she said. I grinned embarrassedly, quietly stammering, "My dad kinda has a lot of money." Don't think I'm like some snobby rich kid, though," I half-heartedly laughed. "This is all—" She suddenly cut me off by asking, "What's that?" I laughed. You know, like the kids who think they're better than everyone else just because their parents have money. "You're better than everyone else?" she asked, confused. "No," I cried. "That is the exact opposite of what I'm saying. I am not." She just looked more confused, but I laughed to myself, my heart warming. No preconceived notions. If only everyone could judge people off their characters alone. After we stopped at my front door and I fished out my keys, I turned to her. "Now," I said in a hushed whisper, "you understand that if he approaches us, he can't know what you are, right?" She nodded softly, adjusting the glasses on her face. "That means, as far as he knows, you don't have chains," I continued. "You have sunglasses on inside because your eyes are highly sensitive or something, and if he shakes your hand—" I trailed off, looking at her for a reply. "I won't telekinetically bitch slap his hand to the ground," she finished for me, grinning slightly. I laughed, opening the door and letting her inside. She gazed around the main entrance room, her staggering footsteps echoing on the expansive entrance floor as her eyes again sparkled with wonder. A bulky glass chandelier hung from overhead, a large oak staircase leading to the upper level of the house, where my dad's studies were. The floor was tiled white marble, so clean it appeared to sparkle as it reflected the chandelier. Two wings of the house jutted off to our right and left, one with the main kitchen, a few vacant bedrooms and a bathroom, the other with my room, a TV room, another small kitchen, and more bedrooms and bathrooms. "John?" a voice suddenly called from down the staircase. "Where have you been?" "Hey, Richard," I called out. "Yeah, I'm back." I glanced at the creature nervously. People were usually extremely off-put to learn that I was on a first-name basis with my father. It's not like we hated each other or anything. Far from it. We just never really bonded, I suppose. He was never really around for that to happen anyway. Focusing on work before my mother's death and then entirely absent from my life for the next 3 years. After I moved back, he tried really hard to make time to be with me, but it was tough, nearly impossible with his job, and I didn't blame him for that. The fact that he was ever able to come home from his office at all let me know that he cared for me, even though he usually had trouble showing it. "Sorry, I'm kinda late," I said, slightly off-put by the fact that he seemed genuinely worried about where I had been for the first time. "I hope it's cool that a friend came over." He walked out from his study, standing at the top of the stairs, his black hair peppered with gray. A pair of small reading glasses lay perched on his small pointed nose. He was in his late 40s, but appeared far younger. He always looked tired, probably because he didn't sleep a whole lot. Despite this, he also had this air of confidence and competence around him, to the point where you would probably trust him to perform open-heart surgery on you with a thumbtack, no questions asked. "That's fine," he half-heartedly smiled, removing his glasses. "Hello there, I'm John's father, Richard. I'm sorry, I would love to introduce myself properly, but Unfortunately, I'm actually quite busy with a client here. I'll have to get back to you in a bit here. I felt an unexpected queasiness rise up in my stomach as I glanced at his hand holding his glasses, to see it shaking softly. He nervously glanced into the room behind him, putting his glasses back on. As he began walking back in, his head turned and he suddenly looked at me, his voice laced with a serious tone despite how he tried to seem nonchalant. "John, would you mind coming with me for a second?" "Sure," I called back, looking at the creature nervously and saying, Just wait here, okay?" I gave her a slight nod. I couldn't see her eyes behind the sunglasses, and as I turned around and headed up the stairs, I didn't see the horrible smile rupture across her face. My dad closed the door slightly and placed his hand on it as I approached. His voice dropped to just above a whisper as he said, "John, it's fine that you've brought a friend over, but please politely send her home." His voice was spiked with worry as he continued, "We're leaving. Please pack your things as fast as possible. I'm sorry, I know this is sudden, but you have to trust me. I tried to call you, but you didn't answer." "Whoa, wait," I stammered. "What? You can't just pull that out of nowhere." I glanced to see the creature staggering up the stairs, her head down, her pale gray hands clawing together. Shit, what the hell was she doing? Choosing now, of all times, to act weird. I was desperately trying to think of an excuse I could pull. "John," he said, glancing back into the room, his face more nervous than I had ever seen it. "Something has happened. This place is no longer safe." He glanced down at my shirt, and his dark brown eyes flashed with horror as he took in my appearance and looked to observe the creature closely for the first time. "John," he stammered, "why do you—" His voice was suddenly strangled out of his throat and his eyes went wide. I thought he simply had something stuck in his throat for a second, but my chest tightened in dread as I suddenly saw the glass of his reading glasses begin to splinter as they warped with heat. I heard a voice behind me seethe out, "What are you doing here?" I whirled around in panic just in time to see the creature's mouth explode open with a horrible bout of shrieking, hiss-filled laughter as she stood feet from me, staggering closer. "Hey!" I screamed, stepping in front of her and waving my arms. "What the hell are you doing?" My father slammed against the wall, making horrible gurgling noises as blood began to bubble up from his throat. The creature's unstable laughter grew louder and louder, and her face distorted with a sort of unrivaled, wild glee as the glasses fell from her face. I tried to grab a hold of her in my panic, but my hand was slapped away more violently than ever before. I watched as my fingers snapped back with such force that a bone jutted to the surface as I gasped in agony and my hand was utterly shattered. I staggered against the wall as my father was thrown to the ground, his arm twisting back on itself, his skin bubbling with heat. All four of the creature's chains erupted out, tearing the backpack to shreds in an instant as they slashed forwards and stabbed my father's limbs in place. I held my hand in panic, watching blood gush down my arm, my fingers unresponsive. I had to stop her. What the hell was going on? The creature stepped even closer to my father, her face a mangled mess, unable to keep the horrible laughter from racking her body as she spat saliva and her eyes danced around in delight. "Stop!" I shouted. "He won't hurt you! That's my father! He's innocent!" My father's eyes flicked to me, his face twisting in confused horror. I went to cry out again, but the creature entirely ignored me as her chilling voice slithered out into the air, directed at my father. "Doctor," she hissed, giggling all the while. I grew faint and I felt my heart stagger over its next several beats. What did she call him? The air around us had begun to blister with heat. I felt my own skin start to burn and looked to see the floorboards by the creature's feet start to warp and twist, horrible waves of distortion spreading out from where she stood. My father went to speak, but as his mouth opened, the creature just slammed her foot down and his head splintered against the floor, blood erupting from his throat. "Why don't you inject me now?" The creature shrieked, her smile reaching her ears as she stared him down and his skin began to peel away. "Send the fucking kill code!" He tried desperately to speak again, but the creature's laughter split through the warping air and she screamed in amusement as, without even using the chains, all 4 of his limbs were ripped from his body, scorching black. "Let's do a test on you!" The creature shrieked, her teeth flashing as her distortions slanted my vision, making the world seem to bend around itself. "Let's see how long I can keep you alive!" Another layer of skin was torn away from his body and his stumps were cleaved down further, each time gushing out blood before the wounds were singed black again. She howled with laughter, her body convulsing. I just helplessly looked between my father and the creature. "John Matthews!" I shrieked, suddenly realizing my last hope. "My name! Where the hell have you heard that before?" She didn't even look at me, squirming with exhilaration as my father's right eye ruptured. "Hey!" I screamed. If I could just get her to enter recovery mode again, to forcibly fall unconscious as she had done before. "Come on, think about it," I continued. "You have to recall those memories. Please at least try." Her eyes flicked to me, but quickly drifted away again. This wasn't going to work. I had tried countless times to get her to remember before, but she had never slipped into that state again. I needed something new, something that would jog her memory. I heard my father's ribcage fracture, and she used his shattered bones to rip his chest open, his organs visibly squirming underneath. As unreal amounts of blood jettisoned into the air and his lungs collapsed, I watched his beating heart go stagnant. This only made the creature laugh louder as she staggered side to side where she stood. "Oh no, you don't!" she cried with bouts of laughter. I watched as his blood, soaked in the carpet, rose in tendrils to suspend in the air, deforming with heat, before swirling back into his heart as the creature forcibly began to make it beat again, nearly crushing the organ with every squeeze. The blood just squirted out with every pump, but she kept feeding it back in, forcing his lungs to expand. The creature squealed with giggles, slowly peeling off more of his skin. As his lungs exhaled, with a faint and raspy breath, he managed to choke out, "School." His one good eye glanced at me, dead and hollow. "That's how it knows your name. It was in your class." Upon hearing this, the girl's giggles ceased and her eyes widened as she violently stumbled on her feet. The air slowly began to stop quavering as the girl's limbs began to fail her. She slumped against the wall, her teeth clenched together in rage. "Listen, John," my father wheezed. "This parasite shouldn't be able to talk, but don't trust it. Not after what it did to your mother. To all those people." "Stop!" the creature screamed, clawing at her head, blood beginning to trickle from her black hair. "There was never any gunman," he rasped. "I said stop!" The creature shrieked again, her teeth clashed together, and before I could blink, she slammed her fist down and my father exploded in every direction. his flesh and muscles spiraling into the air in ropey strands like party streamers. His skeleton lay, charred black, but as the creature tried to will the bones to scatter as well, they only shook slightly as her legs failed and she collapsed to her knees. Her hand rushed forward to prop herself up against the wall, but missed and her form slammed to the ground. Her unconscious, unblinking eyes gazed up at the ceiling as her chains went limp and the air cracked loudly. I slowly slid to the floor, my eyes wide, my skin ghastly pale as my whole body shook. I was only vaguely aware of the tears streaming down my face, washing off my father's blood, becoming crimson before dripping to the already red-stained ground. I couldn't feel my heartbeat, couldn't feel my breathing. I didn't feel much of anything at all. It was probably 10 minutes that I lay in that state, not blinking once the whole time. I had apparently, at one point in my shock, used one of the many strips of clothing lying around me to tie my hand and stop the bleeding. Every movement felt like a dream, though. I watched some chunks of flesh slowly slide down the walls while others simply dried to the surface. The once brilliant red blood painting my surroundings slowly decayed, becoming a dull brown. It wasn't until my eyes dried enough to see clearly that I was able to see it. Lying by my father's filleted corpse was a radio. A red light blaring brightly, light static coming from the speakers. I was vaguely aware of what this meant, but I didn't care. Those armed men could show up, they could send an entire damn army to shoot me dead. It didn't fucking matter anymore. The creature lying unconscious feet from me. All of my friends, my mother, because of her, my father now in pieces all around me, the one responsible for her creation. That's why he became obsessed with his work, why he sent me away. My apathy quickly began to dissolve as I realized what it was that connected all of these tragedies together. That fucking facility. Whatever the hell organization was playing with these forces, that goddamn reflective building had killed everyone I ever cared about. That fucking facility had ruined my life. My teeth gritted together, and as I staggered to my feet, I suddenly heard it. A light knock at the door. I glanced to see the red light of the radio had now turned green. A misplaced smile broke out across my face, and I slowly staggered down the stairs. My one good hand clenched tight, and a light giggle escaped my throat. I was going to fucking kill them. Even if I could just jab out one person's fucking eyes, that would be enough. If I could just grab one of their guns, I wouldn't hesitate to spray them all down, not for one fucking second. My smile grew as I imagined how it would feel to watch them drop like flies. They had taken everything from me. The least they could offer me in return was their lives. I watched the handle turn as I reached the base of the stairs. I staggered with excitement as I watched the hand that twisted the knob softly swing the door open. As the person stepped inside, however, looking around with dull eyes, My grin was instantly slapped from my face and my blood ran cold. It had no eyelids, her light brown hair dancing softly as she staggered inside. I didn't see any chains coming from its back, but that all changed when it saw me and its face went wild with delight. Knowing what this meant, I immediately threw myself to the ground, just barely escaping a streak of blackness as it slashed at my neckline, hacking the staircase railing in half instead. A sudden voice rang out as men streamed inside, kicking the door open further and piling into the room in numbers that made my head spin.
"Subject 47, the voice shrieked. "That is not your target. That is a human. If you kill him, you will be terminated."
The shouting man held a sort of radio in his hand, waving it at the creature. He was wearing a nice black suit, a red tie, and a heavy pair of block-like glasses that made his eyes seem humorously large. The girl's face scrunched in frustration, hissing at me as her slashing devices squirmed out of her back. Not chains this time, but rather metal coils, no longer tipped with spears, far more maneuverable now, and acting more like whips that could apparently retract fully. And there were 6 of them, spread out behind her like squirming spider legs. Improved version, I thought to myself, staggering back to my feet.
"What the hell does it matter anyway, huh?"
I said, staring the creature right back in the eyes.
"They're just going to kill you eventually anyway, as soon as I get a better version. Huh? What do you think about that?"
The girl hissed again, her fingers clawing as her eyes looked straight through me. She was precisely the same age as the girl I knew, but unlike her, this girl didn't seem to have any personality at all.
"Tell me," I cried. "What the hell does it matter?"
The creature made guttural hissing sounds and grew all the more irritated as I egged it on. "It can't speak," the man said as the military personnel all looked at me. "The left hand deactivates that part of the brain. It deems it an unnecessary function."
"Oh, so now your weapons don't even need to talk anymore!"
I cried, shoving my way past the creature, paying no attention to how my shoulder erupted in pain as I slammed past it, causing it to stumble backwards slightly. The whole militia looked at me aghast as I did this, and even the suited man's face flashed with curiosity as I approached, my fists clenched in rage.
"Why don't you just build a fucking tank?"
I cried.
"At least that saves you the trouble of removing their feelings, too."
I reeled back and slammed my fist forward.
"You're a fucking monster!"
I was so weak and helpless that the man easily dodged my punch and grabbed my arm firmly. He twisted and I crumpled to the ground without so much as a struggle. "How do you know so much about what we're doing?" the man said gently. "I'm sure your father wouldn't have told you. You're quite the strange boy, aren't you, John?" I wrenched my arm from his grasp and he let me, smiling and taking a step back as I staggered to my feet again.
"Doesn't matter what I know,"
I cried.
"What matters is that I'm going to fucking kill you."
My hand was clenched so tight my fingernails were drawing blood from the skin. It dripped onto the floor in light splatters, and the man glanced down at this, his smile growing.
"I'm going to kill you,"
I repeated again.
"For murdering all of my friends, for killing both my parents, and for what you did to that girl."
My finger pointed up to her form on the staircase, and the man's face grew curious. His glasses slowly dropped down on his nose. Yes," he smiled. "Subject 12. I see you two just met. Miracle you survived. Your father always had a particular interest in that one. He talked about that thing far more than he did you. I think he was a little unreasonably cruel to it, to be honest. He probably would have killed it if the other scientists didn't hold him back every day." He laughed slightly. But after what that monster did to his wife, who could blame him? My mind exploded in white-hot rage. "Shut the fuck up!" I screamed, my punch again landing helplessly weak. He chuckled, but I suddenly brought my other fist forward and decked him across the face, my fingers further shattering with the impact as blood squirted out from the wrapping in a large jet. I collapsed to one knee in agony as the man stumbled back, more surprised than hurt. "Stop calling her a monster!" I cried. "Everyone I ever loved is dead because of what you turned that girl into! Giving someone the ability to telekinetically slash people apart with chains, you're the fucking monster here!" The man smiled again, readjusting his glasses and wiping my blood from his face. "I don't know where you're getting your information, boy," he said, "but I think you misunderstand our facility's purposes." I tried to get back to both feet to punch him again, but found myself too weak. I was barely able to stay kneeling. "You should have seen what that so-called girl did before we even got to her and before the left hand awoke." The man smiled, shaking his head slightly. "She drew lots of pictures too. Mountains of corpses, her standing at the top. Her sketchbook was practically stained red. That's probably the only color she used." He laughed, looking down at me. "She always drew people she knew, disemboweled, strung up and strangled with their own intestines. I believe you were in there, John. Yes, in fact, you were the most drawn subject by far." His face grew slightly apologetic now as he breathed out. "We've come to realize that the people they liked most while they were human seemed to become their fascination just prior to awakening, especially unrequited affection. Based on how obsessed she was with you, I'd say she had a pretty big unknown crush on you, eh, John? You knew her as Callie Ames." I simply stared at him, my heart dropping, my chest seizing up. Could I believe what he was saying? That girl, I didn't really remember a lot of the time leading up to the incident, but I barely knew her. Quiet and awkward. I thought she had died in the massacre, but all along she was the cause. The man spoke up again. "Of course, once the left hand awakens, they will kill any human just as well. You're no longer special." "You see, John," he sighed, "you seem to be ill-informed. I don't know who told you about what we do, but we are certainly not giving these monstrous creatures telekinetic abilities." My already weak blood froze solid as he uttered the next sentence. "We are suppressing their abilities." "What is the left hand?" I stammered.
Designed to destroy